Welcome to Semcast at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. I'm Dale Meyer. What do you think of when I say the name Narnia? It's the enchanted land from the children's books of C.S. Lewis, and more recently, the subject of 2 movies from Disney. The latest is called Prince Caspian. My guest today is Dr. Francis Rosso. He could be called Concordia Seminary's resident Narnia expert, and he has for many years taught the class the gospel in C.S. Lewis's novels. So, Dr. Rosso, welcome.
Thank you.
And here on campus, you are affectionately called
Rev.
So we'll just call you Rev. Where'd you ever get that handle?
When I went to my first parish and met my first wife-to-be, the senior pastor said that despite my youth, I should be called Reverend. So my first wife-to-be kept the letter of the law and shortened it to Rev. And that became, therefore, not a title so much as a nickname. And I can see why. In Lewis, there's one character called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. And when you think how that reflects Lewis himself, there was an author called Clive Staples Lewis, and he almost deserved it. No wonder he's called C.S. Lewis. And I'm called Francis Carl Rosso. I've never liked the name, and so I welcome anything, Rev included.
Okay, well, Rev, I had never known that story, so I'm glad to have the chance to hear this. When I was a student at Concordia Senior College, you were a professor there,
right.
and this is
Wasn't
going
I
back
called
to the
Rev
60s.
then?
Yeah,
sure.
All the time.
I never had you in class, though.
No, and that's why I'm struggling to make it and to understand. If I had had you in the late 1960s, my life would have taken a different course. I would probably understand more about...
You wouldn't have been Lutheran hour speaker if you had taken me.
Yeah, well, who knows. But if I had taken you, I wouldn't have to learn all this stuff because I would know more about it than I do. Tell us about, why is C.S. Lewis so popular so long? What is it about him that has made his longevity a fact?
Well, I think for one thing, aside from the Christian overtones of his writings, now he's just a very good writer. Tremendous capacity for metaphor. He once stated that the interest is the first duty of art. That's one of his principles, and I think he practices that principle in his writing. He doesn't mean that it's the only duty of art, but it's the first duty. You've got to get people's attention. And then, of course, give them some substance. I think it's a good rule for preaching, too. Mm-hmm. I think, secondly, again, not getting into the Christian aspects of his writings, that he has the capacity to enter into the mind of a child. Let that mind be in him which is also in a child, at least in reference to the Narnian Chronicles, despite the fact that he admits he was uncomfortable around children. But he can think as a child thinks. In fact, he can think as a bear thinks. He can think as a badger thinks. He knows what children want. In the Narnia Chronicles, there are so many refrains, like Dr. Seuss. He'll make a coinage and then repeat it over and over and over. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you have never close the wardrobe door behind you. And you'll say that over and over. It sounds cautionary at first. Soon it becomes amusing. Kids love that.
That's not bad preaching either.
No, it's right. Hammer the idea home. And he has a sense of humor.
So he's qualified as an excellent writer, but he also has a Christian aspect that you talk about. Tell us about his journey of faith.
Well, I don't know much about it, except that he was reared by Christian parents, reared in the Anglican Church. He fell away when he went to school. Probably one of the instruments of his falling from faith was a teacher whom he called the Great Knock. He was a tremendous teacher, very logical, clear, good at debate, but he did destroy Lewis's faith. And then companionship with Christian friends, Tolkien for one. I had a lot of discussions, arguments, debates about Christianity. He was converted, he says, at least in his autobiography, to theism in 1929. and then 2 years later to Christianity. And it's a strange conversion. He claims it was not at all emotional. He resisted it. He was a reluctant convert. He said that he couldn't escape the facts anymore. And the night that he became a Christian, he says, was one of the unhappiest nights in his life. No more could, he said, the Hegelian fox was flushed out of the woods, and he had to be a Christian.
Well, that says something about the popular view of faith as an emotional feel-good experience, and it wasn't that for him at all. And in the Bible,
at least he says it wasn't. Now, one of his biographers, Wilson, claims it was more emotional than he cared to admit, but I don't know.
But we do make a distinction. Faith are those solid, objective truths that we hold to. And then the faith does have a personal, subjective experience to it, too. But in this day and age, everybody thinks it's just the subjectivity that makes faith faith.
Right. But getting back, getting back to the reason for his lasting legacy, I think lies in his Christian overtones of his writing. For me, at least, and I think for most people, he's given doctrine a new translation. He's decanting the old wine of the gospel into new wineskins, and it's a thrill to see old familiar doctrines from a fresh perspective.
Well, again, that's what we're supposed to do when we preach.
Not
that we always do.
Yeah,
you talk about the lasting legacy. Do I remember this correctly, that he died on the same day that President Kennedy died?
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
November the 22nd, 1963.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So it is a lasting legacy.
Right.
What do you think? Tell us, if you can very briefly summarize The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and how do you evaluate that from a Christian perspective?
Well, can I talk about the proper approach, first of all? I think,
yes, sir.
I think you are ignorant or stupid if you see no.
Let's hope. I hope there's more.
Not you.
I hope there's more to this sentence.
The you is general, not individual.
It may be true in this particular case, but go.
But if a person, let me be more formal. If a person sees no correlation between the Christian religion and the Chronicles of Narnia, I think he's just being imperceptive. That's a nicer word. On the other hand, if he sees too much, I think he's turning literature into, well, a Sunday school lesson, into propaganda. And I know in teaching it and in reading it, I think we've got to steer between those two extremes all the time. Now, hardly anyone, I think, would doubt that Aslan is the Christ figure in all the Chronicles, and especially in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
And is Aslan the lion?
Aslan is the lion, right. And he is taking the place of Edmund, who is told a lie and betrayed his country. And now what he calls the deep magic demands that when a person has been a traitor, he has to die. And so Aslan agrees to take his place, and of course he's crucified on a stone, or killed on a stone rather than crucified on a cross. But he's shaved, he's spit at, he's jeered at, and the stone cracks at dawn 3 days later, and here Aslan is up and running again. So the similarity to Christianity is very obvious there. But then there are other things. Are they echoes of Christianity or not? The horn that Susan has, often used to summon people, summon Aslan's help, maybe equivalent to prayer. I see that, but I wouldn't insist on it. The cordial that Lucy heals people's wounds with has been equated by some to the Lord's Supper, the sacramental benefits. But now, Peter, the High King, does that stand for the Pope or not? See, I mean, you gotta draw the line here somewhere. A Catholic reader will probably be quicker to see that than I would.
There's kind of a sublimity in literature that you just can't pin down.
One of the great things about Lewis is what I call the ripple effect. That's my word for it. That is, you see the point where this gospel stone plunges into the water. At that point, we recognize. But then the ripples keep going out and out and out, and where it stops, nobody knows, and you don't know. They get fainter and fainter. Let me give you a good example, not from Prince Caspian, but from the Silver Chair. Prince Caspian, the King Caspian in that book, dies, and then his son, Rillian, and Jill and Eustace accompany Aslan to Aslan's country, perhaps the parallel to our Christian heaven. And there is the corpse of Caspian in a stream, river often being a metaphor for death. He's dead. Aslan looks at it and sheds tears. Right away you think of Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus. And he commands Eustace to go over and get a twig from a thorn bush and prick it into his foot. And blood ensues, and then the blood drops on the corpse, and Caspian comes back to life. Now, the impact, the gospel stone there, of course, is vicarious. The blood saves and the resurrection. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you can stop there. Aslan wounds his paw. Since the witch in that story had her head cut off, you right away see Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelium, that Satan's head would be crushed, but God, the seed's foot or paw would be injured or hurt. A thorn is used. Isn't that interesting? It reminds you of the crown of thorns. It may remind you further of the thorn being one of the consequences of sin, thistles, thorns, sweat. So in being pierced by a thorn, he's saying he's taking our sins, the curse of sin, upon himself. He has Eustace do it, and he calls him son of Adam. Does that suggest, does it or not, that we were there when they crucified our Lord? We had a part of it. The children of Adam and Eve, Jill and Eustace, had a part.
Because the name Eustace?
Yeah, well, the Eustace, yeah, well, that probably, the dwarf thought that meant useless. And Eustace, I think he meant that. It could be pronounced Justus. Justified. Justus et peccator.
Yeah, saint and sinner.
Yeah,
Eustace.
Saint and sinner, right.
Yeah.
So the ripples go on and on and on there.
Well, this
that's exciting.
This is fascinating, and I'm not an English literature buff. I'm not sure what I am. At any rate, are you sitting here and you revel in telling this and thinking about it? And I assume that a lot of readers would do the same thing, sit leisurely, read this, and put their head back and think about the connections, maybe too many, maybe just the right amount.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows? What beyond that? I mean, what in your own life besides teaching this, what is this? What's practical about this? And I don't mean to say that something has to be practical to be justified, but how do you use this great experience of reading Lewis?
Well, I'm a preacher, of course, as you know, and I certainly make use of it there. It challenges me to get by the watchful dragons, as he says it, that he gets by. That people who have become overly accustomed to Christian doctrine, nothing wrong with the doctrine, it's the way of saying it, going in one ear and out the other, suddenly find it put in a new and fresh way. They may have resisted it, and suddenly Lewis, and I hope therefore I and you and others, slip past those watchful dragons with a new metaphor, a new approach.
So you're saying, for one thing, this is an aid to the creativity task of preaching.
Right.
The new wine and the old wineskins.
Right. It is, and I think you don't learn that overnight, nor do you plagiarize it. Or if you do plagiarize it, you do it by osmosis, not by design. It soaks into you. I defy anybody to read Lewis through and through without being a better thinker, a better writer, a better preacher, even though you may not be aware of just how that took place. But here is clear, lucid, dynamic writing that gets into your bloodstream.
Do you know, was Lewis not only a disciplined writer, but would he sit down and just fire the pages off?
I'm told that he was not a disciplined writer. He Tolkien criticized him for not revising and being more precise, although I, for the life of me, cannot find where the carelessness is. I wish I could write that way. I cannot settle for a first draft or a second. Apparently he could.
My experience is that you don't own it until you've written it and spoken it.
Yeah, right.
And so it's one thing to read Lewis,
Yeah.
as you're encouraging us to read Lewis.
Yeah, right.
But then to take that and apply that to whether it be a pastor with sermons
Yeah.
or a layperson journaling the day's reading, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I use the example, I don't know how much time you have here, but I use the example of Bree, a talking horse from The Horse and His Boy. He was a rather sophisticated, arrogant, conceited horse. And one day he was asked by a girl whether Aslan was really a lion. And then Bree, in his most professorial manner, probably shutting his eyes, says, "No, of course not. He's not a lion, but he's pictured as a lion for such and such reasons." And while he was giving this professorial lecture, Aslan the lion sneaked up behind him and touched his rump with his whiskers. And the Bree jumped the proverbial mile. It was the moment of truth. And he learned right there, then and there, that Christ did come in the flesh, that it's not a figure of speech, it's not a metaphor, that the incarnation is true. It's flesh and blood, the, what do we call it, the docetic heresy, that it's unthinkable for God to become flesh and blood, to become hard material, tangible, seeable, touchable. But he is, and he destroyed the whole liberal theology with that picture right there. Because
I mean, that's great. And I want to thank you, Dr. Rosso, for joining us on today's Semcast. I have to tell our viewers something I've shared with you a couple times. Because of his knowledge of Lewis and other authors and his ability to write and write well, he said a number of things over the years that that have stuck with me. In fact, you don't even remember them. He told me once, but one of them was you were talking in chapel. This was literally in the early '80s about some coffee mug that you had found that said "Expect a miracle," and you said in the chapel sermon, "It's a coffee mug, expect a miracle. I wonder what's going to be in this cup of coffee."
Really?
You said that.
I did?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember.
Are you sure?
Yes,
well, I'm having a senior moment right now.
That's okay. I know I did. You said that. And the other thing, which is a great way to wrap up our conversation, is in a chapel sermon here at Concordia Seminary in the early '80s, he said, "We know precious little about God, but the little that we know is precious."
Yeah, well, I might buy that. I don't know. Yeah.
I've quoted it many a time with attribution to you. So thank you for joining us today on Semcast, and thank you for helping us to learn more about the land of Narnia. Your being with us is deeply appreciated also. I look forward to seeing you next time.